Hi, this is Nathan Helm, author of Kingdom Society: The Black Hood. You're listening to Tale of the Manticore.
The following podcast is intended for a mature audience. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome back to Tale of the Manticore, Season 3. Like the creature from which it takes its name, Tale of the Manticore is a mashup, a crossbreeding between two different species of storytelling. Here you will find the unpredictability of old-school paper and dice games with the storycraft of a dark fantasy novel. No character is sacred, and none will be spared if the dice decide their fate is at hand. According to lore, the tail of a manticore is barbed with cruel iron spikes. There will be much pain in the days ahead. Last time on Tale of the Manticore. Chapter 3 begins with the season's first player character, Achillea, trying to deal with the sudden upending of her old life. Her master, Aldve, has been turned to stone and his spellbook stolen. Her first thought is to run back to the Iron Tower, but when she arrives at the spot, accompanied by her friend Cord, the tower is gone. Achillea returns home and begins a more thorough search of it, looking for clues. She finds 3. First, there's drops of blood near the spot where a glyph guarding her master's spellbook detonated. Second, when she goes downstairs, she finds the components for a poison-slowing remedy on Aldve's workbench. Finally, beside the statue that her master has become, and scratched into the dirt of the basement floor, is a name, Audok. Cord recognizes it, and shows Achillea a sketchbook from Aldve's book collection. Audok is the name of the artist. On the final page is an inscription that seems to invite Aldve to come back north sometime. At this point, Achillea makes a decision and a promise. She will go north, find this Audok, and get some answers. She packs her own spellbook and some traveling supplies into a bag. In the morning, along with Cord and Robin, she leaves home and begins her quest. Chapter 4, Part 1, Day 2, Morning. Mythic event meaning: create the intellectual. Party status: Achillea, 4 out of 4 hit points. Spells available: Achillea has memorized Shrink. All necessary preparations were complete. Achillea had hidden all of Aldve's valuables and packed everything she could think of that she might need to be gone for a few days. She had given the Oak Man specific instructions to guard Aldve and then thrown a blanket over her master. It didn't really do much to hide him, but it was something. Finally, she had nailed a note onto the front door. It read, "A wizard lives here. No trespassers." Since the door had a bar inside, but no actual lock she could engage from the outside, this was the best she could do. She doubted that anyone would come by. The creatures that lived in the woods around here, both evil and good, had enough sense to stay away. The only human that ever came here was Aaron, the boy from the nearest village who delivered supplies. But Aaron only came once a season, and he had just come and gone yesterday, so she doubted very highly he'd return before she did. With the door shut and the note in place, it was time to go. Cord was with her, carrying half of their supplies in a custom-fitted backpack he usually used to hold firewood. He had his axe as well. After they had taken a few steps away from their home, Achillea whistled, and presently, Robin flew down from his perch atop the hummock to settle on top of her head. She felt like she should say or do something before she left. She opened her mouth and was about to say,
"I'll see you soon,"
when she realized those were the last words Vapi had spoken to her. She shut her mouth, sniffed, and started walking north. Way back in Season 1, I started using a set of homebrew mechanics for overland travel, or hex crawling, as the old schoolers call it. The first is for determining weather, and it's dead simple. Roll a d20. The higher the result, the more favorable the weather. That might not always mean that a 20 is a perfectly warm and sunny day with a light breeze. Sometimes rain would be the most desirable. Today, however, I think a classic summer day would be best for this traveling trio. Let's roll and see what we get on a D20. A 6. Okay, that's not extreme weather by any means, but it's a bit unpleasant. Too hot is my interpretation. Another mechanic I used in the past is something I called the stumble upon roll. It's another D20 roll, but this one ignores any result from 2 to 19 inclusive. If I do roll a natural 20, however, the PCs stumble upon something beneficial. That might take one of many forms. On a 1, you guessed it, they run into some bad luck. This might be in the form of enemies, but more often it's a thing, event, or circumstance that introduces or augments a new or existing problem. It feels a bit early to be making this roll, but what the heck, I'm gonna do it. Here goes. A 7 on the die means nothing exceptional is discovered. That reminds me of one final core mechanic for overland travel, the wandering encounter roll. This roll happens in addition to the stumble upon, and is much more likely to result in a meeting with hostile beings. The expert rules suggest that encounter checks are usually made once per day, but the DM may make additional checks if appropriate. This rule set further says that for a trek through a wooded area, an encounter should occur on a roll of 4 to 6 on a D6. Fair enough. Achillea is moving through dangerous, untamed wilderness, far from any human settlement. So this is what I'll go with, adding a high-low roll to determine if any given encounters take place during the day or night. Here comes the first wandering encounter roll for Season 3 of what I expect will be many. Rolling a D6 and hoping for a low result. Dang it, I got a 4. That means I need to follow up with a high-low. High means the encounter happens in the daytime. Rolling a D20, a 1. It's going to happen in the middle of the night. It also means I'll need to go away and make a wandering encounter table. Back in a jiffy. Okay, I've made a simple D8 table. I'll post it to taleofthemanticore.blogspot.com in case anyone is curious to see. It's got everything from harmless animal all the way up to deadly monster, with a single chance for an NPC encounter tucked in there for good measure. Rolling a D8. I got a 1. Well, okay then. The going was both exhausting and exhilarating. Exhausting because sometime before noon, the clouds parted and the indifferent disk of the sun blazed hot and angry over their heads. The terrain trended uphill, and the exertion left Achillea sweaty and breathless in short order. Normally, she liked to conduct a kind of one-way conversation with Cord when they were together, but by mid-afternoon, she found she didn't have the lungs for it and spent the rest of the day's journey in silence. Around evening, but well before sunset, they passed outside their home territory. There was a circle of influence that lasted about 8 or 9 hours' walk in a radius around Altve's house. Years of living near a wizard had taught predators to stay away. Now that they were outside this imaginary circle of protection, Achillea felt exposed and on edge. Her surroundings were no longer familiar. The trees, the land formations, even the fauna felt alien and dangerous. Despite this, nothing troubled the trio as they continued north. Eventually the sun began to dip, and the temperature dropped. The stars came out, and spangled the night sky with winking diamonds. It was beautiful, and serene, and magical. They picked a spot to rest for the night under a foxtail pine, and Achillea pushed together a bed of soft needles before spreading out her bedroll. Though footsore and depleted, sleep did not come quickly. Achillea's clothing was damp with perspiration, and it clung to her skin. Her mind continued to whir with anxiety, too. She had a terrible thought. What if Aldve, though his eyes and ears were turned to stone, remained conscious? He'd be blind and deaf, but still cursed with the ability to think. In such a situation, she would go mad, she thought. But no, that was impossible. His brain would be stone too, so he must instead be in some kind of stasis. As soon as that worry was put aside, a new one took its place. What if someone or something came into their house and found him vulnerable? But, of course, Aldve was now invulnerable, impossible to harm, even to move. So this fear, too, was unfounded. Cord was nearby. Since constructs didn't sleep, he simply sat, with his back to the trunk of the pine, keeping watch. Robin picked a branch overhead. As the stars slowly wheeled on their heavenly axis, Achillea drifted off into a light sleep. She was woken by Cord, shaking her with a wooden hand. By infravision, Achillea saw her companion's face. As it was permanently painted on, it was the same mildly smiling face that was always there. But, somehow, by the way he held himself, she knew there was trouble. The wooden hand moved, touched her chin, and then turned her head, gently, to the left. In the darkness, Achillea saw a pair of unblinking silver eyes. Chapter 4, Part 2, Day 2, Midnight. Mythic event meaning: create the intellectual. Party status: Achillea, 4 out of 4 hit points. Spells available: Achillea has memorized Shrink. The shining eyes were close, but they only startled Achillea for a second.
Get back here, little thief. Come to steal my travel rations? Shoo!
The intruder, a curious and courageous raccoon, flinched at her words before bolting off into the night.
Thanks, Cord. We won't get very far if we lose our rations.
Cord required neither food nor water, but he understood the ways of mortals and creaked forward in agreement. The slim wooden man then resumed his vigil, while Achillea settled back to sleep after pulling her satchel close and putting it under her head to use as a pillow. The rest of the night passed without incident, and Achillea slept well. The encounter with the raccoon had made her feel like the threats beyond Aldvay's borders were not as frightening as she'd imagined. In the morning, she ate a quick breakfast of dried river fish and wild oat biscuits. Then she packed up her bedroll, and the trio resumed their trek north. The expert rules for overland travel include a chance for getting lost, but I'm going to set this aside for now and say that as long as the sky is clear enough to show the stars, Achillea can make her way more or less northward without significant error. I will, however, take this chance to make the rolls for Day 3. First is weather. On a D20, a 13. It's a lovely summer day, cooler than the previous, and good for travel. The next roll to make is for stumble upon. Only a 1 or a 20 will alter the narrative. The roll: a 4. Nothing especially out of the ordinary. Yet another roll will be for wandering encounters for Day 3. On a D6 and hoping to get a low result. The roll: a 6. Looks like there will be another encounter, and it's not likely to be another raccoon. Will this encounter take place in the day or night? Rolling high-low, with high being a daytime encounter. I got a 13 on a D20, so it happens during the day. And a final roll, this time on my D8 Woodland Encounter table. The full table is posted on my blog, taleofthemanticore.blogspot.com, by the way. Here we go. A 6. Oh dear, that's not great. Turns out I'll need to make a few more rolls to flesh out and set up the encounter, but I'll do those off mic so we can jump back into the narrative. It had been a good day for travel, with mile after mile of gorgeous countryside rolling by under their steady tread. In the morning, they'd wound around a hillock tufted with ash trees. In the afternoon, they'd crossed a sparkling brook, where Achillea had taken the opportunity to wash her face and hands, to drink her fill, and replenish their water supply. She had also pulled out the sketchbook to see if the countryside matched any of the pictures. It didn't. In the evening, while the sun hung low in the west, they waded through a field of tall mountain grass shot with bright flowers. At the top of the next hill, Achillea spotted a lone figure to the east. The moment they saw it, it saw them. At first, the person turned, as though they meant to run off. Then they seemed to reconsider, and began to move towards Achillea, with a waving hand thrown up in salutation.
Old man, little girl.
This person must not have seen them properly to have so wrongly identified them, perhaps because they were backlit by the sun. Achillea also briefly considered running away, but then had second thoughts of her own. This person might know something about Audok, or recognize the scenes in the sketchbook she carried. Ignoring Robin's warble of warning, she pointed herself towards the figure and started walking to meet them. At closer range, she could see it was a young man of about her own age. He had long, tangled hair and wore clothes of shabby linen, patched in places. He seemed terribly thin and dirty. The man's pace slowed as his squinting eyes began to make out details and recognize his error. Cord was no old man, and Achillea was not a child. Upon this realization, he stopped in his tracks, and his waving arm dropped.
What are you? A dryad and her tree spirit?
There was a noticeable tremor in his voice. Achillea was momentarily perplexed before she understood that he meant her and Cord. She burst out laughing, causing the man to tremble in fear and back away, showing his palms in surrender. Achillea swallowed her mirth and offered him a friendly smile and a bow.
No dryad, nor tree spirit. Well, not precisely. My name is Achillea. This is my friend, Cord. And this,
She pointed to the little stuffed bird on her head.
is Robin. Well met, traveler.
Well met.
Stammered the other, his eyes flicking back and forth between Achillea's pointed ears and Cord's axe. The bird did not seem to concern him in quite the same way.
Well met indeed. And your name, good sir?
Achillea smiled pleasantly again.
Forgive me. You aren't going to put an enchantment on me, are you?
Achillea laughed again, which did nothing to calm the stranger. She shook her head.
I don't plan on it.
The other man swallowed hard and cast a quick look behind him, perhaps judging he could not get away even if he tried. He sighed and gave his name.
I'm called Eidolian. My, friends call me Eedo.
May I call you Eedo?
If you please, wood spirit.
Achillea let the wood spirit thing pass.
Eedo, then. And I suppose that must mean we're friends now.
When rolling for this encounter, I got a 6. Human outlaws. The result prompted a quick series of other rolls. How many outlaws would there be? I figured 1 to 3 was about right, and the dice decided it would be a solitary outlaw. Would either side be surprised? To find out, I used a d6. On a 1 or a 2, they would be surprised. I got a pair of 4s, meaning neither would be. Finally, I did a reaction roll. The BX rules say that for an encounter like this one, where the disposition of the beings encountered is up in the air, the DM can roll 2d6 and compare the result to a chart. I did so and got a 9, indicating no attack, monster leaves or considers offers. Okay, that's a start. By DM fiat, I decided that this person, alone and so far away from civilization, was likely an outcast among other outlaws. That in turn implies a few things. He's probably under-equipped, hungry, and there's a decent chance he's being hunted. Using that monster reaction result, I think he's going to try to bargain with Achillea for some food. He doesn't have much to offer in exchange. Or does he? You know, I think I have the opportunity here to use my current mythic event meaning. Create the intellectual.
And furthermore, I'm not a wood spirit.
She touched the tip of her right ear as she turned her head for him to see.
I'm an elf.
An elf?
Replied Eedo.
I've never met one of your race before, but your companion must be a wood spirit.
Not exactly.
She patted Cord on the shoulder, and the construct twisted his body to her, showing his eternal painted-on smile.
He's, well, I suppose it's a bit complicated. This is Cord. He's a friend too. Oh, and this is Robin.
She pointed to the top of her head without needing to look. Robin peeped in reply.
Where do you hail from, Mistress Achillea?
A sudden pang of wariness made Achillea hesitate for just a second before answering.
To the south. And you?
Zacia.
It was an equally vague reply, but a more specific answer would have been wasted on Achillea anyway.
Since we be friends, Achillea,
Said Eedo, slowly.
would you happen to have any food to spare?
I have a little.
Achillea was reluctant to give away the one thing she expected to need on her journey, but she could tell by looking at Eedo that he was starving. Besides his thinness, there was a certain air of desperation about him.
It'll be dark soon. Let us find a place to rest, and then we will share a light meal.
She suggested. Eedo readily agreed, and, just as the top edge of the sun disappeared below the western horizon, the 4 of them settled down at a small clearing hidden behind a row of fir trees. I feel like Eedo is going to be with Achillea for at least a little while. It's too early to say if they'll join forces, but I do think it's in both of their best interests to stay together for now. For that reason, I think I should roll up his stats and see who he is. Given the possibility that he might join Achillea long term, I'll use my homebrew rules for PCs to roll him up. It's a simple system designed to keep from making hopeless characters. I just roll 3d6 down the line and re-roll any results of 5 or less. Shall we begin? For strength. A 10. Intelligence. A 9. Wisdom. Pretty good, I've got a 12. Dexterity. 11. Constitution. 12 again. And finally, Charisma. Ooh, a 6. Well, okay, that's an interesting set of results. Eedo is average or slightly better than average in every stat except for one. He's not exceptionally strong, or smart, or nimble, but he does have a very low charisma score. Although this score gives him a -1 to reaction rolls, I won't retcon the one I made earlier. I wonder what it is about him that makes people dislike or not trust him. I'm sure I'll figure it out as we go. Now, I was hoping the stat rolls would give me some guidance as to Eedo's class. He's a fighter or a thief, probably the latter, but let's let the dice decide. On a d6, 1 to 4 means he's a thief. Rolling. A 2. Thief it is. That means he gets 4 hit points. I'm going to say by DM Fiat that the only possessions Eedo has are the clothes on his back. No food or water, no weapons, no armor. He's alone because he had to flee a bad situation. I'm not sure exactly what that is yet, but I have an idea percolating in my brain about it. Let's get back to the narrative. I'm going to add a food supply tracker to the usual status information, I think. Chapter 4. Part 2. Day 4. Morning. Mythic event meaning. Create the intellectual. Party status. Achillea. 4 out of 4 hit points. Eedo. 4 out of 4 hit points. Supplies. The companions have 4 portions of food and 6 portions of water remaining. Spells available. Achillea has memorized Shrink. The conversation between Achillea and Eedo the previous evening had been a kind of careful dance. Neither side wanted to give away too much information. Eedo had been evasive in his explanation of what he was doing so far away from human settlements, but, to be fair, Achillea had not given up much either. She had decided early on that, though she and this man could be friends, she would not mention Aldve, nor where she had come from. Instead, she had told an edited version of the truth, that she lived with her father, to the south, and that she was searching for an acquaintance of his, on a mission of substantial importance. He had likewise been vague, saying he had come to the woods with some companions, but that they had gotten separated due to an unforeseen occurrence. When Achillea had asked him if he intended to go west, into the lands where men lived in numbers, he had simply replied that he preferred the wilderness. Something about his lack of details came across as evasive, and Achillea mostly kept up her guard, even when the night passed without incident. The stranger made no attempt to rob her, and that counted for something. She hadn't really been too worried about him actually succeeding in taking her things, or harming her. Cord, who never slept, would not have let that happen. Still, it was to his credit that he hadn't tried. In the morning, as Achillea collected her few things together in preparation for a long day of travel, she couldn't help but ask,
Have you heard of a man named Audok?
Audok?
echoed the other, wiping sleep from his eyes and yawning.
Do you know him?
Achillea asked again, hopefully.
As a matter of fact, yes, I do.
Achillea almost burst with joy. What a stroke of luck to have found someone who knew the person she was searching for. She immediately had the sketchbook out of her bag and was showing him the illustrations within. Eedo cupped his chin and nodded sagely as she flipped the pages.
Yes. I recognize the name and the work. He lives to the north.
Achillea experienced a mild pang of doubt. Had she mentioned before that she was headed north? Perhaps he had simply guessed from the direction she'd been traveling when they'd met. She pushed the worry aside.
What do you know about him? Tell me everything.
Thanks for listening to Tale of the Manticore. If you're enjoying the show and would like to help to support it, there are lots of ways to do so. You can recommend the show online or to friends. You can like and repost episode announcements on social media. You can pick up One Shot in the Dark, the Pendulum World Building Tool, or Encyclopedia Manticorica on DriveThruRPG. You can purchase a Tale of the Manticore t-shirt at www.beararts.store. And finally, you can rate or review the show on your podcatcher of choice. I'm grateful for any and all support of the show. As you know, I like to read a listener review at the end of each episode. This one was left by the M2M podcast on Apple Podcasts, and this read aloud is long overdue because somehow I missed this review from, well, a long time ago. Anywho, the M2M podcast writes, I've never listened to a podcast about D&D or anything related, but listening to this is like Game of Thrones, but audio. The narration is excellent and dark and super immersive. I admittedly have to look up certain parts because I'm not an expert at this at all, but it is fun and makes you want to keep listening to more. Editing is on point too. My apologies for having somehow missed this review, the M2M podcast. It's super cool that even listeners who aren't much into D&D can still follow and enjoy the show. Thank you so much for that review. I have one voice actor on the show this go-around. Welcome to the cast, Chas, from Rollbound, who plays Eedo. I love how your voice characterizes Achillea's new companion. For anyone who'd like to get in touch with me, I'm at Manticore Tale on X, Tale of the Manticore Podcast on Instagram, or taleofthemanticore@gmail.com. I always enjoy hearing from listeners. Finally, I keep a blog where I post all kinds of show and RPG-related stuff, like art, maps, tables, crafts, and show notes. You can find it at taleofthemanticore.blogspot.com. The adventure will continue on the next episode of Tale of the Manticore. It's the story where chaos rules.